Okay, take two. I don't know. Anyway, hello everybody. Today is Monday's Eve. Unfortunately, it is the end of the weekend and we are going to be starting the work week tomorrow, which for me starts at like 8 a.m. tomorrow. But I did want to just sit down and have this conversation. I just wanted to, I guess, kind of throw my 2 cents here and give my opinion on a topic in which nobody asked my opinion about in any way, shape, or form, but you'll deal, of course. I do, of course, have to start out with, again, hey, everybody, how are you doing? I do want to start out with who I am. So my name's Zay. My full name's actually Atama Zay, but I go by Zay because you know how people butcher African names, you know, it's just never cute. I just go by Zay for the most part, outside of like, you know, really close friends, older friends and family, obviously, but I consider myself a historian. So I'm somebody who did study history in college, but at the exact same time, I'm also a freelance writer. I typically write articles about Black history or queer history, but oftentimes, honestly, it tends to be an intersection of the two of them, like Black queer history. That's something that typically has always interested me. And the reason I wanted to make this video is because I feel like it's a conversation we need to have about the way that Black history is typically taught, and some of the issues that I have with it. Particularly one big one that I'm going to be speaking about. Obviously, I just feel like it's a conversation that we definitely need to have. People have been, I think, in the last couple years speaking up more about what I'm going to get into, but I definitely felt like I wanted to give my 2 cents overall on this thing. And I thought it was actually really, really interesting that I literally decided today to make an outline for this video because it's something that I'm really, really, really passionate about. If I look over here or anywhere else randomly, I'm looking at my cat, Ati, who is just roaming around right now. But the reason that I find it very interesting that I did this today is because I actually came upon me when I saw an Instagram post for my favorite Instagram page. My favorite Instagram page is called Black Archives. And it is, to me, like, there's really no Instagram that I look forward to as much when it comes to posting as I do Black Archives. The lady who runs it, I believe her name is Renee Shirlise. I'm not sure if I pronounced that perfectly, you know, fine. I'm like looking down because I do have some notes here. Her name is Renee Shirlise, and I actually got her book earlier this year. So February of this year, I went to South Carolina. That's where my family lives. And visiting South Carolina, after purchasing the Black Archives book on Amazon, I was inspired to basically do the only way I can really say it is like a photo document, like archiving project when I got home. So my family, my parents were born and raised in Cameroon. My brothers and I, most of us, we were also born in Cameroon, but we were raised in the United States. And we've always had like a bunch of like photos. I don't know if like anybody else's family is like this, but I'm assuming it's the case. Like you just have like photos laying around. And we do have like albums from here, like just like here and there. Like we have had albums, I've seen them. It's just that we have a lot of photos that don't actually really, you know, they're kind of just in a bag somewhere or like in an envelope somewhere. And so when I went home this February, what I decided to do was take all those photos, and in taking those photos, create this like archive of our family and memories of loved ones and all these things. And I was inspired once I got Renee's book about Black Archives. What I love about Black Archives is the fact that whether it's like found family photos or it's photos of like more historical figures, more historical places, things like that, I feel like she does a really, really good job at spotlighting the Black experience, especially during the Jim Crow era, in a way that I feel like is definitely more objective and more diverse when it comes to that experience, which is definitely something that I'm going to get into later. So we were able to find these photos literally all over the house. Like they were in my parents' room, some of them were in the living room, some of them were like just all over the place. And I was able to like put this photo archive together. I did two albums mainly. One that was like more direct family, like my brothers, my parents, my half siblings, grandparents, people like that. And then I had another one that was like family, friends, and more distant relatives. The albums that I got were really, really good because those photo booklets actually contained like where you can put the photo, and then they also had like a description spot like right next to it. And I really, really loved that because it meant that I wasn't just archiving photos. I was also writing the stories, writing descriptions next to those photos. So basically going through those photos, I had my mom and my dad there. And what I was doing is I was saying, who is this person? Who is their relation to you? Honestly, sometimes asking like, are they still alive or are they not? Obviously, I did recognize some of those people and I could answer those questions myself. But there were a lot of people who I wasn't really aware of who they were, even though these are photos I'd been seeing my entire life, and I'm literally 28 years old. So basically we were able to do that. I was able to, put names to faces. I was able to, for the most part, get like also places, like where they think this photo was taken. But also another really big and important thing to me is like the year. Like I really, really want to know the year that this photo was taken. And I try to be really, really precise with that. Like to me, even like the 80s isn't enough. Like I want to know, like, is this the early 80s, the mid 80s, the late 80s? I don't know if that's just me, but it's who I am. And one thing about the Black Archives book, which is actually, it's like back on the shelf there. I've had it there ever since I bought it. There's a way that Renee describes the photos, because in the Black Archives book, she goes into her own family photos and the stories behind those photos, the individuals in those photos, as well as contributors, like people who've like gone ahead to send their photos to be documented in this book, which she's also put on the Instagram before. Is she actually mentions and really refers to these archives as evidence of lives lived. And that to me is the most important thing about why I'm even making this video, about the narrative and how the way that I view history. At the end of the day, these photos are just that. These images, these videos, they're evidence of lives lived. I wrote a tribute at the front of like the main family booklet that I put together. And I use that term evidence of lives lived because a lot of these people are passed away. But when you look at these photos, you're seeing the smiles, you're seeing joy, you're seeing laughter, you're seeing weddings, you see children who are now grown, you see the elders, you see the ancestors, and it's a tribute to their lives, the diversity of their lives, the narratives of their lives, the stories there, stories that I wasn't there for, but stories that still affect my life today. And Black Archives being literally like my favorite Instagram ever, it really, really, it really helps that not only do I love her Instagram, I was able to get that book and put that whole project together, which I think is really, really important to the story that I'm going to be getting into. Okay, so now to, I guess, one of the big reasons I wanted to start this video. So I'm not actually on TikTok, but obviously TikTok is something you can't escape. I see a lot of TikTok reels, if that's what you call them, I guess. I see a lot of TikTok reels on Instagram when I'm sort of like doom scrolling into my brain rot. And there are certain videos that I ran into. I'll try to find them to insert them into this video.
Bro, I wish I lived in the 60s, yo. Get in the back of the bus, now. Now you being racist. Bitch, I will shoot you, nigga. Oh my God. What year you think this is? 1990? Bitch, we in the 60s, yo. Get in the back of the bus now. You can't drink from there, bro. Come on, man. It's for the whites only, bro. Drink from there. Shut up, I will shoot you, nigga.
But it is oftentimes a lot of like, I want to say like Black content creators, or definitely like young Black people on TikTok. And one of the big conversations that's coming up is, wishing you were born in another generation, which is obviously nothing new. Like I'm 28 years old now, but I do remember growing up how it was like popular to wish you were like growing up in like the 80s and the 90s. And I think for a lot of like young teenagers today, they kind of wish they were my age, maybe growing up in the 2000s, and teenagers back in the early 2010s and things like that. But it's a conversation that goes back even further, and people saying, I wish I was born in a completely different generation, like the 50s or 40s, whatever that could mean. And a lot of these Black content creators who would immediately hearken to like, for very obvious reasons, like the Jim Crow era, and like Black people or people of color in general, and women who are like, I wish I lived in the different generation. And I know it's definitely like a joke. It's definitely jokey, but in the words of Cat Williams, I'm pretty sure he's the one who said it, all jokes contain true, you know what, And they're basically saying like, you live in the best generation, essentially, to be black, to be a person of color. And it's not necessarily something that I'm going to disagree with, only because I feel like obviously we need to understand that history is so much more vast than literally 1950s America. I feel like so much of what we consider traditional, like 1950s America, we forget that like there's thousands and thousands upon thousands of years of history that like predates that. But it's sort of this idea that like modern times are for you and to experience the past as a black person or a person of color. But I'm going to focus on black people here. Like, to experience the past as a black person means trauma. It means abuse. It's this like overtly traumatic experience. And it's one of those things that I feel like, and it's definitely something I'm going to get into, but it's one of those conversations that, as much as people say it's joking, I feel like it's creating a precedent oftentimes from a lot of younger black people to disassociate themselves completely with the past. You know, they're not interested oftentimes in getting that full narrative because it's already been explained to them. And that narrative is trauma, abuse, or whatever, you know, whatever that is. So that sort of like also inspired this video, because I feel like a lot of young black people, a lot of black people who are part of Gen Z, who are millennials. Like, I'm somebody who's like a zillennial. I guess I was born in 1996. I don't really consider myself too much Gen Z, but I know I'm kind of young for millennial as well. But I feel like, you know, that attitude that we have, that a lot of young black folks have towards history, it oftentimes comes off as a disinterest in me, because there's this automatic assumption that history is trauma and it's abuse. So I mentioned Black Archives earlier and how much I loved that page, because she does such a great job at diversifying that narrative. She shows videos of black people in the 1930s at like a football game, you know, like pageant girls, chorus girls, these like, you know, black spots in places like Los Angeles, you know, just all over the country. And there are like, so I have like some of like my favorite photographers, like Wayne Miller. He's a photographer who took amazing shots of like the Chicago South Side back in the 1940s. And those are some of like my favorite historical images. I love Harry Adams, who was a Los Angeles based photographer who took a lot of images of like black LA during the 1950s and 60s. And then honestly, like my all-time favorite photographer, Charles Teeny Harris, who was Pittsburgh based, and he took amazing photos of Pittsburgh in the 1940s and 50s that definitely highlight the black experience. He even took photos of like, you know, like literally like the black queer experience in Pittsburgh in the 1950s. So it's like really, really interesting to see those photos, because as I said, there's a narrative there. There's a diversity, you know, obviously it diversifies the narrative of what it meant and what being black looked like 50, 60, 70 years ago in a way that I feel like a lot of black history pages don't. I feel like even things like, if you ever heard of like the All-American News, that was like a newsreel that was first like started in the 1940s and was aimed specifically for African Americans. I've been looking at the Library of Congress, and they have a lot of like amazing videos of like the All-American News. And I find that to be, you know, just another way that I'm sort of getting that more, I guess, diversified content, definitely more individualistic content of what the black experience may have looked like in the United States of America in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and times like that. So here we are. What is the problem with Black history pages? So I'm not really gonna like name any pages by name here, but there is, I believe, probably the most popular Black history page on Instagram, verbatim, hint. So my issue with a lot of Black history pages, I'm gonna start with, again, social media, Instagram and Twitter. In this page in particular, I've noticed that when it comes to this page, they will post a dramatic event, a traumatic, very traumatic, TRAUMATIC event in Black history, and they will give it like 5 paragraphs. And it would be a story of like a lynching, like black people being run out of town, like a race massacre, anything like that. And they would give it like literally 5 paragraphs. And that's not a bad thing. These are things we need to know about. These are things that we absolutely need to learn, especially in an era where a certain people are trying to erase and take that history away from us. But at the exact same time, it's just something I noticed. But another thing I noticed is that in between those posts, they will post a really nice, flattering image of like people from the 1950s or 60s. They'll post images by like Harry Adams and Charles T. Harris, and there would be no description. Like, I'm not even joking. Like, this Instagram page will post 5 paragraphs about a lynching, and then they'll post like an image. Oftentimes it's like a celebrity like Eartha Kitt or Hendrix or the Jackson 5, Diana Ross, whoever, people of that era, and nothing. They'll post an amazing image and there'll be no description. And I find it so funny, but also slightly infuriating, because I'm just like, you're putting so much energy into writing 5 paragraphs about this traumatic event, this, Black trauma. They've even posted an image, when they shed light on the Rosewood massacre in Florida back in 1923, and it was an image of a dead man on the floor, that somebody in the comments was like, you should probably make this like sensitive because this is traumatizing to people, with this big description. But then you'll see these amazing images of like Black life in the 1950s and 60s, and it's crickets. It's just like a description with like the year it was taken, and at times like the photographer. And that's like a pattern I noticed with this Instagram page. And I'm just like, I find it very interesting how you would dedicate this much energy, which is necessary energy. Obviously, we need to learn about these things, into like a lynching, a race massacre, this traumatic event of the past. But then you'll post this wonderful image of Black people in like 1955, and it's like, why is there no description? Why aren't we learning about this scene? Who are the people in this image? What is their significance? They're happy, they're smiling. What's their story? Or is the story only negated to, the trauma that's being dished out? There's another really, really, really popular Black history page on Twitter. I don't even know if I'd really call it page, but they're on Twitter, and they do Black and African history. And I realize it's also that issue of the overemphasis on trauma, typically tied to like colonialism and other aspects of Jim Crow. And once again, I am not saying in any way, shape, or form that those stories are not necessary. I'm not saying that it is not, those narratives aren't important. What I'm trying to say is that when you're allocating like 85% of the deep dives that you're doing into that content, into that trauma, and there seems to be an over emphasis on it, it comes off to me as where you're basically taking, what could be diverse narratives, but you'd rather focus on one thing. And if that's what those, pages are meant to do, I fully get it. But it's something that I've noticed with a lot of really, really, really popular Black history pages on Instagram. And even like tweets, like there's this one Black history page, I'm not going to say its name, but like, and I keep saying that, but like their image is like, of like, I don't know if it's from like the 1960s or 50s, but it's like people like on the side of the street, and they all genuinely look miserable. And I'm like, it's like a Black history page, and I'm just like, your like freaking logo is like very, very miserable looking Black people. And I'm just like, this is it. Like, this is like part of the problem. And I was just like looking at that today. I was like kind of like just taking note of like pages where I see that being the pattern with. And I sort of honestly went ahead to liken this towards greater media in general. So at the end of the day, social media is a lot more new. And I want to say that social media takes this particular cue from more traditional forms of media, like TV shows, but most definitely movies. And this kind of brings us into like the whole conversation of like Black history films and like the depictions of Black people in history and what we call like a lot of like trauma films. So a lot of Black history movies, at least those that are definitely acclaimed and recognized by the Academy, the powers that be, like the Academy Awards, Golden Globes, whatever, SAG, whatever you want to call it. Or is it SAG? I don't know. A lot of those tend to also focus on the narratives of trauma. One of the biggest movies, like more recently that I can think of, was definitely Till. That one I think is actually done a little more tastefully, only because it actually does focus on the story of Emmett Till's mom and basically her fight for justice for her son. Emmett Till is obviously a very famous lynching that occurred in 1955. And it doesn't even actually really show like, the torture and murder of Emmett Till, which I think was very, very tasteful decision by the director. But again, it got a ton of attention, and it falls into that narrative again of a lot of stories, like Selma in particular. Selma, I saw when it was in theaters with like two friends of mine, and it actually starts out with the scene of like the Birmingham church bombing in 1963, I believe, when those young girls lost their lives in that bombing. And it was very like, I think I was like maybe 19 or 20 when it came out, but I just remember sitting in the theater and being like, wow, okay, that's a lot. Like, we just got into this theater and like, that is a lot. And it's a narrative that I think we constantly see. Like, if we're looking, and I did take notes of like some of them, we think of like a lot of the really big Black history movies that we've had in like the last 10, 12, 13 years, however many that it may be. I'm thinking of like The Help. I'm thinking of 12 Years a Slave, Selma, which I mentioned. We did have a remake of The Color Purple. I actually didn't really watch that one, but I do know, obviously, like the original Color Purple with like, Oprah and, Whoopi Goldberg. Also like Antebellum and Harriet, which I know Harriet had like a ton of controversy for like other reasons. But at the end of the day, when you take all those movies, what do they have in common? They have in common Black trauma, whether that be slavery, Black trauma from Jim Crow, and things like that. There is, again, what I'm saying is like this overemphasis on the Black trauma. So when we are looking at these films historically, it's almost like we're looking at these films historically, and I'm just kind of like, what other aspects of Black history could we touch on a film that is acclaimed, and a film that is given a platform, and a film where the actors might actually win an Academy Award or a Golden Globe for? Like, what other narratives and stories do we have to shed light on as opposed to just these? And again, I'm not saying these are bad movies. I'm not saying that these stories don't need to be told, and I'm going to keep saying that throughout this video. All I'm trying to say is that I think we need to be very, very cautious about trying to diversify the narratives. Another really controversial one, which was a TV show, was Them, which is a Jordan Peele creation. I'm not like somebody who like watches all of Jordan Peele's movies, but I do know like he's very much into like sort of like the horror, I guess, creepy genre. And Them got a lot of controversy too, because it's like the story of like a Black family moving to like a Los Angeles suburb in the 50s. And it's a lot of trauma. It's psycho, when you really think about it. And it's something that a lot of people were also likening to a Black trauma film. So there is this article I was able to read today, and it's called like the Black Trauma Film Paradox. I'm gonna go ahead and pull it up here. It's called the Black Trauma Film Paradox. I have it pulled up on my phone, and it was written by a woman by the name of Nemi Epibunya. I'm not sure if I like butchered that or not, but she is the journalist who wrote this particular story back in September of 2023. And what she says right here is, revolving around the center of Black trauma media lies this question: where are the Black joy stories? I have found that most of the films and shows I turn to in order to mindlessly enjoy a story do not have any Black characters, let alone Black protagonists. This is a very, very interesting quote that I have from that article, because what she's basically saying is, amongst all those Black trauma films and all that narrative, where's Black joy? Where are like happy, smiling Black people who are enjoying their lives? Like, I don't care that it's 1952. Not every Black person in 1952 was miserable the entire time. Like, it was not 1967, which was the year when the very final major civil rights act was passed, which was Loving versus Virginia. It's not like Loving versus Virginia was passed in 1967 and millions of Black Americans woke up that day like, I can finally be happy now. Like, nobody smiled. Nobody had a good time before the 1960s or the 1970s. And it's just like that quote from her article, really, like the fact that she has to basically say, if I want to laugh and watch something lighthearted, I'm not watching something with Black protagonists. And it's definitely not historical. And I'm just like, yeah, like, that's kind of true. Not that there are a lot of things, obviously there are a lot of things that we watch with Black protagonists and Black characters that make us laugh. But from a historical perspective, like, that is something that happens like very, very rarely. And what I wrote here is like, we want to share these stories, but when we do share positive, but we also want to share positive and uplifting stories. So again, when it comes to Black history, and I was looking at both social media and more traditional forms of media, like television shows and movies in particular. My issue with them, which is obviously that's the general point of this video, is again the overemphasis on trauma. It is the overemphasis on not necessarily trying to diversify the narrative. It's always inserting the exact same narrative: abuse, trauma, Jim Crow, segregation, whatever it is. And again, I'm not saying that those things didn't exist. We all know what American history looks like. We all know what America looks like even today. Okay, girl. But what I'm trying to say, and I keep saying what I'm trying to say, listen, there's a lot more to the story. There are narratives there. There are happy videos. There are happy smiley photos. There's so much to look into, there are so many scenes. There's the debutante balls of 1950s Harlem, the Harlem chorus girls. I want to see images of Black pageant girls of the 1940s and 50s, which I have so much, so many of them saved. So many ways to look at Black history and tribute our ancestors without always falling into the narrative of the trauma that they endured. That is my big issue with them. And definitely reading that article, especially the Black trauma film paradox, I feel like that title says, it says enough in and of itself. That is the paradox that exists there. It's always a trauma film. Sometimes maybe I want to go to a theater and watch something Black that's historic and not leave the theater with a literal existential crisis, not feel scared or feel dread or some sort of really, really horrible feeling of this is real life. This really, really happened. It's horrible. I understand that these stories did happen. Jim Crow happened, lynchings happened, but at the end of the day, I feel like it's important that we try to diversify the narratives that we show and spread, especially when it comes to Black directors and content creators. That's something that needs to be emphasized on, most definitely. Okay, so where does that leave us now? Where do we come from in an era where our social media, our movies, and our TV shows can only approach a historically Black perspective through trauma? Where does that leave us? What I wanted to say, and this is something that I feel needs to be, it's not stated enough. Black people relate through our ancestors through trauma. That's literally it. There's literally no other way to sugarcoat it or even say it differently. African Americans relate to their ancestors through trauma. And I am gonna forego this conversation by saying that I'm African. I was born in Cameroon, even though I was raised in the United States. My parents, grandparents, obviously they were all born and raised in Central Africa. So this is a conversation that I feel I'm more so speaking to ADOS or African descendant of slaves, those who are descendant of enslaved Africans who were brought here several centuries ago, as opposed to more recent Black immigrants like myself. That relation is purely traumatic. African Americans, Black Americans cannot, there is almost literally no other way to relate to these ancestors outside of the trauma that they experienced. And I think a lot of even phrases that Black people say, things kind of keep on keeping on. I feel a lot of that does come from trauma too. This sort of keep going, keep pushing regardless of whatever happens, we're gonna make it. How religious the community is, that's another major factor. I understand that all these things stem from that trauma, but it's again, it almost feels like a trauma bond. And I know that's not the definition of a trauma bond, but even Black people who are very into history, it's giving trauma bond. It's we're looking and we're searching for the worst and nastiest stories. And sometimes it feels like a gotcha moment of why didn't we learn about this? And it's that's true. We didn't learn about this and we should have learned about that. But it's also if you're going to allocate 95% of your content to tell us that if you're Black and you go back before 1960, you'll be burned at the stake and hung from a tree. it's baffling. We all know that people, they laughed, they smiled, people got married, people found ways to, we're talking about a population of people who quite literally taught this country how to dance, like we think of like popular culture, popular music in this country, and we know that is a huge contribution that comes from African Americans in this country, but it's like we are only emphasizing and only spotlighting how traumatic their experiences were. We're not shedding light on other narratives. We're not shedding light on the diversity of their experience in any way, shape, or form. So like I'm on Reddit, and there is a Reddit page, like I don't know if it's called like a page or forum, like The Way We Were. And I'm like, I used to be honestly one of the top posters there. Like I rarely posted and wouldn't get like number one there. And most of my photos were like always black, definitely like I love like posting like pageant photos, just a lot of like photos, definitely a lot of Charles Tini Harris, Harry Adams, Wayne Miller, people like that. Alton Alexander, like some other, just giants of photography of that era. And I could post like the happiest photo of like black people in the 1940s and 50s. And there would be comments like, oh, it must have been so hard. Like, I know they're smiling, but oh my God, the trauma they must have experienced. And I'm just like, can you just can they just be happy? Like, I don't know why it needs to be a conspiracy. Like, black happiness needs to be this conspiracy. It's like a smiling photo of people, like there's like one of my favorite photos by Harry Adams is like Barbershop, which is from 1956. I don't know the woman in that photo with him, but she is like in a tube top and like these short shorts. This is literally 1956. She's genuinely so sickening. Like she has like her waist is like sickening. Like she has like these like hoop earrings. She just looks gorgeous. And she could turn heads like that in 56 and even in 2024, damn near like, 70 years later. Even like I could post a photo like that and it's just like, oh, life must have been so hard for them. And it's like, listen, I get it. Like Jim Crow was real. Like, things were hard, but at the same time, it's like there was happiness. No group of people exist simply just completely from like the misery, and trauma that they experience. Things are different, like where you travel around the country, obviously the black experience in Birmingham, Alabama in 1955 was very different than the black experience in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania that same year, which may have been different from the black experience in Chicago, Illinois that same year, as it would have been in Los Angeles or even Salt Lake City, Utah. You know what I'm trying to say? Like there's a diversity to that story. But again, when you come from these social media pages and you come from these movies and these television shows that overemphasize trauma and abuse, it's like, why wouldn't they come to a photo of smiling black people because it's 1950 and say they were like 2 seconds from like a lynching? I'm like, girl, like they're at the beach, nobody's thinking about that. Like, like let live. It's just one of those things that like really, really bothers me. At the end of the day, what I want to say is Black history is diverse. And when you fail to show that, when you fail to acknowledge that, you're not tributing our ancestors. You're not tributing those people. My project that I did this year when I was going ahead to put together all these stories, when I was hearing the stories of a lot of these people in these photos that, again, I've been seeing my whole life, but never actually like maybe knew who they were specifically or like what relation I had to them, a lot of the stories were traumatic. They weren't always happy. Not everybody's happy all the time. That's life. But if I were to go in here and make that entire album the misery of my family, that is an energy that is going to pass on to me. That is an energy, and I'm choosing to just focus on that. I'm consuming it. It's like humanity is diverse. It's not just blackness. It's any version of humanity, like being white in the 1950s. Sorry to break it to you, didn't mean that you were the happiest person in the world either. There were poor people who were struggling. There were lynchings some of the most famous lynchings are lynchings of white men is what I'm trying to say. History is diverse at the end of the day. Narratives are diverse because human beings are diverse. And when you recognize the diversity of those stories, both in the sadness, but the joy, both in the failures, but also the trauma, the failure and trauma, but also the joy, the successes, the wins and the losses, that's when you're really tributing people. You tribute your ancestors, you tribute our ancestors by acknowledging them wholly. That 360-degree version of themselves, just not this version of themselves that's just traumatic. You know, like Black history is not just post after post after post of trauma and then like a cute photo of like some Black kids in 1950 with like a description of the year and photographer, which is like, no tea, no shade, but honest to God, like that still makes me laugh. Like the fact that this page does that so routinely, I swear they're gonna do it tomorrow. Like it's gonna, because they had like a Black trauma post today. I'm sure it's gonna be like Jimi Hendrix or somebody tomorrow, or Diane Carroll. I don't know. I live for it. I always like the photos, just saying. But again, it's like the diversity of that experience. Like kind of like think of like the Shade Room, which is like this Black culture Instagram page, which I hate with a passion. Like anybody who's like an active super participant in the Shade Room, I already have an opinion of you. Sorry to break it to you. But like, it's kind of like the Shade Room, like that side of like Black culture that's like ew. And then you have like one of my favorite Instagram pages, which is like Embracing Black Culture, which is another Black, you know, culture Instagram page, but they focus on positivity. You know, you don't go into the comments and see, you know, this like, you know, sexism or homophobia. They don't encourage that environment. They encourage an environment of love and positivity where people support each other, unlike the Shade Room. Both aspects of Black culture, and obviously I'm choosing to ignore one and focus completely on the other, but they still encapsulate the experiences we're having today, you know. And there are other Instagram pages I wanted to shed light on too, kind of like Historically Black Sense. That's like a really, I really love that one. That one is like focused mainly on like HBCUs and like historically Black colleges and universities. They do post things all the way up to like the 90s, but they do have like amazing posts and videos of like the 30s and 40s as well. I also love like 8-count archives, which is like majorette culture. Like I love vintage Black beauty queens. Like I'm literally gonna make a whole video of that one day. But like I love vintage Black beauty queens, and like majorettes are like such glamour girls, and they have wonderful majorette photos of like the 60s, 50s, 40s, you know, dating all the way back. So those are like just some of my favorite Instagram pages. But I really just needed to talk about this. I needed to get it off my chest. Like I needed to say something because it was gonna eat me up. It was gonna eat me alive. And I know you guys all want my opinion on this, which is not true in any way, shape, or form. But I just needed to say something because I feel like we have to be very careful with the way that we choose to tribute our ancestors. And when I went to South Carolina and decided to put that album together, listen, it was everything. It's the happiness, it's the pain, it's the joy, it's what makes us human at the end of the day. And I feel like we as a community or just a nation, we need to do a better job with Black history. We need to make sure that we are diversifying, and I'm gonna keep saying this, we need to make sure that we are diversifying the narratives of Black history. We need to make sure that we're shedding light on the joys and the positives as well. And in doing so, create an avenue where a lot of young, you know, let's say Black Gen Xers or even like Gen Alphas who are coming up, they can look at the history and not completely try to dissociate themselves from it. You know, they can go and see a film and not have to leave in like tears, like, Jesus Christ, this is so traumatic. Like, I just saw a man hanging from a tree. Like, you know what I'm trying to say? Shedding light and diversifying those narratives is, to me, the best tribute that we can give to those who came before us. Because at the end of the day, they are just like we are. You know, listen, we don't exactly live in the best of times. I'm just gonna be honest. Like, we think it's like we don't exactly live in the best of times, but we still have fun. You know, we still go out and we meet up with our friends and we go on trips, and, you know, you fall in love, you fall out of love, you got kids that you need to pick up, you got work tomorrow at 8 a.m. You know, there's a lot that goes into our lives. There's a diversity in our lives today. There's a diversity in the stories that we live individually today. And why can't we give that exact same, you know, why can't we give that courtesy to our ancestors? Because at the end of the day, we are going to be ancestors, baby. We're not going to be alive forever. You know, I'd hate for somebody to look at my life in 50 years and be like, gee, because he lived in the 2020s, he was miserable 24/7. No, girl, we had fun too. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, we got out, we got turned, we did all those things. We had fun, like we enjoyed ourselves. And that is the best, again, that's the best tribute that we can give them. So again, yeah, that's just my 2 cents. Thank you guys, if you made it to the end of the video, for sitting and kind of watching me rant and throw myself into a narrative that absolutely nobody asked me to throw myself into. You're welcome. And thank you for sitting through it if you did. But yeah, that's my opinion. I'm going to, obviously there are a lot of things I plan on touching on this channel, getting into. But this is definitely something that I felt like needed to be said sooner rather than later. But yeah, I'm ready to go to bed. Ati, my cat, is sleeping. I have to wake up at 6 a.m., which I never do actually. But my alarm is at 6. I'm more of like a 6:30. It's just like a 30-minute warning. Yeah, I have to wake up and go to work tomorrow. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. And I feel like I'm at work. Thank you so much for your time. And yes, enjoy your day, whatever day that is. Bye.